Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
Living in a neighborhood governed by a homeowners association can be a mixed bag. On one hand, it ensures the community maintains a certain standard, but on the other, it can feel like Big Brother is constantly watching. My story is a testament to the latter, and it all began with my love for cars. For context, my house is located in an area governed by an HOA, but due to some conflicts with the previous HOA rules, I managed to get my house excluded from it. This meant I didn't have to follow certain HOA rules, although I still adhered to the off-property rules, such as no parking cars on the street. I thought I had found the perfect balance between enjoying my passion for cars and living in a community that respected individual freedoms. Now let me tell you about my collection of cars. I have a Dodge Durango SRT, which I've modified with a raised suspension, ram bar, and a few other enhancements that make it stand out. I also have a Nissan Skyline that I'm working on as a project car, something I've dreamed about for years. And then there's my Dodge Challenger, which serves as my daily commuter. It's a great car, reliable and powerful, and I've always enjoyed the attention it brings. The HOA had never raised any issues about my Skyline or Challenger, mainly because the Skyline stays in the garage, and several HOA members own Challengers themselves. However, everything changed when a new HOA president took office. She was the epitome of a Karen, and as fate would have it, she lived directly across the street from me. From the moment she moved in, I could sense that she had a problem with anything that didn't fit her narrow definition of what a perfect neighborhood should look like. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon when she first knocked on my door, and I had no idea what was about to unfold. I opened the door to find her standing there with about 4 or 5 other HOA representatives. She had this self-righteous air about her, like she was ready to enforce some kind of neighborhood law. "Hello, sir," she began, her tone dripping with condescension. "I would just like to remind you about HOA Rule 6, Section 4. Any and all modified cars," she gestured dramatically toward my Durango SRT parked in my driveway, "are not to be parked on the street or driveways." I took a moment to process her words. "Well, I'm not part of the HOA, so that rule does not apply to my driveway. I won't park it on the street, but I can and will park it on my driveway." I thought I had made a reasonable point, but she wasn't having any of it. She pointed out that my SRT hung over the sidewalk by about 2 inches, which in my opinion was no inconvenience to anyone. I mean, come on, it was a minor detail. When I explained that my SRT was roughly the same length as my driveway and that I needed space to open my garage door, she responded with the snarkiest comment I could imagine. "Well, can't you just put it in your garage?" At that moment, I felt my patience wearing thin. I opened my garage door to show her that it was packed full of parts and tools because I was in the middle of working on my Skyline. The sight of my cluttered garage seemed to set her off like an atomic bomb. She started screaming, "Rule 6, Section 3 says you cannot modify your cars in your driveway or garage." I took a deep breath and calmly replied, "I am in no way affiliated with the HOA. If you look for my house in the HOA files, you will see that my house is not in the HOA. Now please exit my property before I call the cops on you for trespassing." Her face turned a shade of crimson, and she began incoherently babbling and shouting. The other HOA members who were present looked uncomfortable, and one of them even muttered, "She's right, you know." They eventually decided to leave, but not before she kicked a wrench I had left on the floor, which unfortunately hit my cat, Mr. Whiskers. Don't worry, my cat was fine, but I was furious. The next day, fueled by a mix of anger and a sense of justice, I decided to take action. I left a vet bill for over $500 at the Karen HOA president's door, demanding she pay for the damage caused to my cat. I figured it was only fair, given that her actions had directly led to the incident. She was livid when she received it and refused to pay, which was mistake number 1. When she refused to pay, I took it a step further and decided to sue her personally. She, of course, opted to use the HOA's lawyers, which turned out to be mistake number 2. I don't know whether she was naive or overly confident in her legal team, but she never denied kicking the wrench at my cat. In fact, her defense was laughable. She tried to argue that my modified car was a nuisance, which only made me chuckle. The court date arrived, and I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. I had gathered all my evidence, including photos of my driveway, the vet bill, and even testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed the incident. The judge listened patiently as I presented my case, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. When it was her turn to speak, she stumbled through her arguments, clearly unprepared for the scrutiny. In the end, I won the case. The judge ordered her to pay me $1,500 instead of the original $500 I had requested. The look of disbelief on her face was priceless. But the best part was that when she lost the case, she inadvertently brought the HOA down with her. Because she had used the HOA's lawyers, the association was now involved in the case, and it didn't sit well with the other members. A few weeks after the case concluded, the HOA held a meeting to discuss her conduct. It turned out that many members were unhappy with her leadership style, and her abuse of power as HOA president was the final straw. They voted her out of office, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental to me. Life returned to normal after her removal. The tension that had hung over our neighborhood seemed to dissipate, and no one complained about my cars anymore. Well, except for Karen, who still lived next door and glared at me whenever she saw me working on my vehicles. But I had learned to ignore her. My cat, Mr. Whiskers, was back to his usual antics, and I was making great progress on my Skyline project. As I stood in my driveway one sunny afternoon working on my car, I couldn't help but reflect on the whole ordeal. It had been a roller coaster of emotions from frustration to triumph. I realized that standing up for myself had not only protected my rights but also sent a message to others in the neighborhood. You don't mess with me or my passion. In the end, I learned that sometimes it's worth fighting for what you believe in, even if it means going up against a powerful HOA president. I had managed to keep my cars, my freedom, and my sanity intact, and as I tightened the last bolt on my Skyline, I felt a sense of pride not just in my cars, but in the journey I had taken to defend my rights. Life was good, and I was ready to hit the road with my beloved vehicles, knowing that I had stood my ground and won. You're right on point. If a lawyer who exclusively represents the HOA were to suddenly appear in court solely to advocate for the president's personal interests in a cat dispute, it would raise some major red flags from an ethical standpoint. Lawyers are bound by strict professional codes of conduct, and engaging in such behavior could put their license to practice law at risk. In particular, this scenario would likely violate rules related to conflicts of interest and loyalty to clients. As an HOA attorney, their primary duty is to represent the association's interests, not those of individual board members or officers. By prioritizing the president's personal agenda over their professional obligations, they would be compromising their integrity and potentially causing harm to the HOA as a whole. Furthermore, lawyers are expected to maintain independence and avoid even the appearance of impropriety. If an HOA attorney were seen as using their position and expertise solely to advance the president's personal interests, it could erode trust among homeowners and undermine confidence in the HOA's governance. Given these concerns, it's highly unlikely that an HOA attorney would risk their reputation and licensure by engaging in such questionable behavior, especially over something as seemingly trivial as a cat dispute. The original poster has raised some suspicions with their claim about their HOA being overly strict about parking rules. Upon further investigation, it appears that OP has a previous post featuring their cat, which inadvertently reveals a crucial piece of evidence that contradicts their story. In the background of the photo, numerous cars can be seen parked on the road outside their house, which seems to undermine their assertion about the HOA's strict enforcement of parking regulations. This discovery raises several questions and casts doubt on OP's credibility. If the HOA is indeed as stringent as they claim, it's unlikely that so many cars would be allowed to park on the road without any repercussions. The presence of multiple vehicles in the photo suggests that either OP was exaggerating or misrepresenting the situation, or that the HOA is not as strict as they made it out to be. Furthermore, one might wonder why OP didn't consider removing or cropping out the incriminating background before sharing the photo. This oversight could imply a lack of attention to detail or an attempt to deceive others about their living situation. Ultimately, this inconsistency has led to a loss of credibility for OP's initial claim, and it's difficult to take their story at face value without further clarification or evidence to support their assertions about the HOA's parking rules. I followed off-property rules, such as no parking cars on the street. We will get back to that later. I took this as a bylaw the HOA has, along with the modified vehicle bylaw for driveway and street, aka no modded cars unless in garage and no cars parked on road in general. I could be wrong, but this was my interpretation. Also, why would the HOA lawyers get involved in the first place? And how exactly does a lawyer being involved suddenly make an unrelated party now financially responsible? Like, if I hire a lawyer, am I also now financially responsible for all of the shitty things their other clients do? Unless we're talking about some type of in-house legal team for an HOA, none of this makes any sense whatsoever. I've been a homeowner in this community for 7 years without any issues, but things took a turn for the worse recently. It all started when our tenant was caught in the community pool after hours. He broke a glass bottle and was vaping. The HOA president, who seems to have an obsession with reviewing security footage, saw everything on the cameras the next day. They didn't call the cops, but they did hit us with fines. $125 for being in the pool after hours, $125 for the broken glass, and initially $100 for vaping. This all happened after midnight. Since then, the HOA has installed a new camera with a direct view of our property. They fined us another $25 because the tenant had his hood up while charging his car battery, claiming he was working on his car. Now we're sitting around $500 in fines. Going in front of the board was fruitless. They deemed themselves in the right. This HOA board is out of control, but I don't want to bring lawyers into this. Our tenants are great people who just made a bad choice when the weather turned warm here in Phoenix. I remember the first time I saw the fine notice. It was a bright, sunny morning, and I was sipping my coffee on the porch. The envelope from the HOA was thick, and I had a sinking feeling as I opened it. My worst fears were confirmed when I saw the list of fines. I couldn't believe it. $125 for being in the pool after hours, $125 for broken glass, and $100 for vaping. It felt like a punch to the gut. I called my tenant immediately to get his side of the story. He admitted to being in the pool after hours and breaking the glass bottle, but he swore he didn't know about the no vaping rule. He sounded genuinely remorseful, and I believed him. But remorse doesn't pay fines. The next day I went to the HOA office to discuss the fines. The president, Mr. Thompson, was there. He's a man in his late 50s with a stern face and a no-nonsense attitude. He showed me the footage from the security cameras. There was my tenant, clear as day, breaking the rules. I couldn't argue with the evidence, but the fines seemed excessive. "Isn't there any way we can reduce these fines?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Thompson shook his head. "The rules are the rules," he said. "We have to maintain order in the community." I left the office feeling defeated. The fines were already high, and I didn't know how I was going to pay them. But things got worse. A few weeks later, I received another fine notice. This time, it was $25 because the tenant had his hood up while charging his car battery. The HOA claimed he was working on his car, which is against the rules. I was furious. Charging a battery isn't the same as working on a car. It felt like the HOA was watching our every move, just waiting for us to slip up. I decided to attend the next board meeting to plead my case. The meeting was held in the community center. The room was packed with homeowners, and the atmosphere was tense. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and explained the situation. I talked about how my tenant made a mistake but was genuinely sorry. I mentioned how we'd been good residents for 7 years without any issues. The board listened, but their faces were impassive. When I finished, Mr. Thompson spoke up. "We understand your concerns, but the rules are in place for a reason. We can't make exceptions." I left the meeting feeling more frustrated than ever. It was clear that the board wasn't going to budge. I considered hiring a lawyer, but the cost would be too high. I felt trapped. Days turned into weeks, and the fines kept piling up. Every time I saw a letter from the HOA, my heart sank. I started to feel paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if the HOA was watching me. One evening, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. As I walked past the community pool, I saw the new security camera. It was positioned to have a perfect view of our property. I felt a surge of anger. This was beyond reasonable. It felt like harassment. I started talking to my neighbors, trying to gather support. Many of them had similar stories. They'd been fined for minor infractions, and the board was unyielding. We decided to band together and attend the next board meeting as a group. The night of the meeting, we filled the community center. One by one, we shared our stories. We talked about the excessive fines, the constant surveillance, and the lack of empathy from the board. It felt good to have a voice, to stand up for ourselves. But once again, the board was unmoved. They listened politely, but their decision was final. The rules were the rules, and they weren't going to change them. I left the meeting feeling a mix of emotions. I was proud of my neighbors for standing up, but I was also disheartened by the board's response. It felt like we were fighting a losing battle. As I walked home, I thought about my options. I didn't want to bring lawyers into this, but it seemed like the only way to get the board to listen. I decided to do some research and found that there were legal precedents for challenging excessive HOA fines. It gave me a glimmer of hope. The next day, I called a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. I explained the situation, and he agreed to take the case. It was a risk, but I felt like I had no other choice. The legal process was slow and stressful. There were meetings, paperwork, and court dates. But as the case progressed, I started to feel more hopeful. The lawyer was confident that we had a strong case. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. I was nervous, but I felt prepared. The lawyer presented our case, highlighting the excessive fines and the lack of due process. The board's lawyer argued that the fines were justified, but it was clear that the judge was skeptical. After what felt like an eternity, the judge made his ruling. He found that the fines were excessive and ordered the HOA to reduce them. It was a huge victory. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The fines were still there, but they were manageable. More importantly, the ruling sent a message to the HOA that they couldn't abuse their power. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed. The board became more reasonable, and the fines became less frequent. It felt like we had won a small but important battle. Looking back, I realized that standing up to the HOA was the right thing to do. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Our community is stronger now because we stood up for ourselves. And while the fight isn't over, I feel more hopeful about the future. Ask the board for the part of the CC&Rs that allows them to take such actions. The specific article, section, and text. I haven't stopped fines with that yet, but I did get my HOA to not purchase gutter cleaning services. Some people with gutters were pushing for the HOA to pay for it, and it is the owner's responsibility to clean them. They have overstepped. You have a very clear and easy path forward. First, pay any and all fines in full before any late fees accrue, before they file a lien on your property. Second, send a demand letter indicating your intent to sue should they not drop all fines by X date. Give them 1 to 2 weeks. Third, if they do not drop all fines, file a small claims case for the full amount of the fines. This will cost you $50 to $75 depending on your state. Legal fees are not recoverable in small claims cases, meaning if the HOA hires an attorney to defend the fines, you would not be responsible for those attorney fees. The huge benefit of this method is that you will be able to get a judge to make a determination as to the legality of their fines, and their ability to fine you in this way. This is a very clear-cut decision in my state, but I can't speak for your state. At the very least, you lose $50 and an hour of your time. At the very best, the ability of your HOA to fine anyone in a similar manner is completely dismantled by a court order. This. YTA if you have glass in a pool and you deserve to be fined. YT bigger A if you act like the victim when you break that rule. My kids play barefoot in our neighborhood pool, and I would expect the HOA to pay for any medical costs incurred. HOAs get the majority of their power from irresponsible owners. The other issues are probably the board being fed up with this kind of crap.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.